Hello students, today we will study chapter number 4, Footprints Without Feet. Basically, this is the story, this is the part of a novel named The Invisible Man, written by H.G. Wells. Let's start. The two boys stared in surprise at the fresh muddy imprints of a pair of bare feet. What was a barefooted man doing on the step of a house in the middle of London, and where was the man? Means two boys were sitting somewhere and they saw some footprints, muddy footprints, and they were quite shocked that whose footprints are these and where is the man whose footprints are these. As they gazed, a remarkable sight met their eyes. A fresh footmark appeared from nowhere. When they were looking at those footprints, at the same time a new footmark appeared and they got shocked again. Further footprints followed one after another, descending the steps and progressing down the street. The boys followed, fascinated, until the muddy impressions became fainter and fainter and at last disappeared together. Means they followed the footprints, and after some time the muddy impressions or footprints became fainter and disappeared. The explanation of the mystery was really simple enough. The bewildered means confused boys had been followed a scientist who had just discovered how to make the human body transparent. And the writer says that this was very simple thing, but they didn't know that they were following a scientist who had recently discovered how to be invisible. Griffin the scientist, and his name was the scientist's name was Griffin. He had carried out experiment after experiment to prove that human body could become invisible. Finally, he swallowed means निगलना या गूट भर जाना certain rare drugs, and his body became as transparent as a sheet of glass, though it also remained as solid as glass. Writer says the scientist's name was Griffin, and he made such kind of experiment that human body could become invisible. And due to some circumstances, he himself swallowed the entire drugs and he became invisible. Brilliant scientist though he was, Griffin was rather a lawless person. His landlord disliked him and tried to eject him. Eject means make him out of his home. घर से भगाना, घर से निकालना. In revenge, Griffin set fire to the house to get away without being seen. He had to remove his clothes, thus it was that he became a homeless wanderer, without clothes, without money, and quite invisible, until he happened to step in some mud and left footprints as he walked. Now, writer says that the scientist, was a brilliant scientist, and but he was a rather lawless person, means he didn't believe in laws or he didn't follow laws. So his landlord disliked him and he wanted to throw him out of his house, and in revenge he set fire to the house, and now he could become invisible. So इनविजिबल होते हुए वो वहां से भाग गया, एंड उसी के ये फुटप्रिंट्स जो वो दोनों बॉयज देख रहे हैं वो उसी के फुटप्रिंट्स हैं. He escaped easily enough from the boys who followed his footprints in London, but his adventures were by no means over. He had chosen a bad time of the year to wander about in London without clothes. It was midwinter. The air was bitterly cold and he could not do without clothes. Instead of walking about the streets, he decided to slip into a big London store for warmth, because he was completely naked without clothes and it was winter time. So it had become so difficult for him to survive in such a winter. That's why he decided to enter stealthily, chupke se, into a big London store for warmth and for food also. Closing time arrived, and as soon as the doors were shut, Griffin was able to give himself the pleasure of clothing and feeding himself without regard to expense. He broke open boxes and wrappers and fitted himself out with warm clothes. Soon, with shoes, an overcoat, and a wide brimmed hat, he became a fully dressed and visible person. In the kitchen of the restaurant, he found cold meat and coffee, and he followed up the meal with sweets and wine taken from the grocery store. Finally, he settled down to sleep on a pile of quilts. Quilt means rajai. So, as he entered into that store, that London store, where he wore warm clothes to make himself warm, and he ate everything, whatever he wanted to eat, because there was no person there. He was all alone. So he ate, he drank, means everything he did, whatever he wanted to do from the grocery store, and finally he sleeps on a pile of quilts. If only Griffin had managed to wake up in good time, all might have been well. As it was, he did not wake up until the assistants were already arriving next morning. When he saw a couple of them approaching, he panicked and began to run. Now, in morning, he couldn't sleep. He slept for a long time. He couldn't wake up early. That's why the people, the assistants of those shopkeepers, they they reached there, and he became panicked, and he started running, and they naturally gave chase, means they followed the thief, means they thought Griffin is a thief, and they ran behind Griffin. In the end, he was able to escape only by quickly taking off his found clothes. So once more he found himself invisible but naked in the chill January. This was January time. It was already mentioned that this was winter time, and it becomes so difficult for him to survive in such a weather without clothes. Means invisible, he cannot survive for long time. That's why he became visible. He wore clothes, but at the same time, people, means both the assistants started following him, and he had to run. He had to be, or he needed to be invisible. That's why he had removed his clothes and again became naked. This time he decided to try the stock of a theoretical company, in the hope of finding not only clothes but also something that would hide the empty space about his shoulders. Shivering with cold, he hurried to Drury Lane, the center of the theater world. Now, this time he decided something different, that theatrical companies, the natak company hoti hai, he wanted to go there so that he can arrange some more things, not only clothes, um, above shoulder also he wanted to cover the space, जो चेहरे की जो स्पेस होती है उसको कैसे छिपाया जाए. So he went there in the theater world. He soon found a suitable shop. He made his way invisible upstairs and came out a little later, wearing bandages around his forehead, dark glasses, false nose, big bushy side whiskers. Side whiskers means जो नकली दाढ़ी मूछ होती है उसके लिए आया है, and a large hat. To escape without being seen, he callously attacked the shopkeeper from behind, after which he robbed him of all the money he could find. Now he went there in that particular such kind of shop, or theatrical company's shop, and he arranged all things. He arranged goggle, he arranged the false nose, whiskers, hat, and when he entered, he was invisible, but at the same time, to come out, he had to be visible. So mm, from behind, he attacked that shopkeeper and he robbed the entire money and he ran away from there. Eager to get away from crowded London, he took a train to village of Iping. This village, you have to remember, village of Iping, where he booked two rooms at the local inn. ILL inn means Dharmshala, Sarai, Choti Hotel. So he, by the train, he came from London to the village Iping, and he booked two rooms in a local inn. The arrival of a stranger at an inn in winter was, in any case, an unusual event. A stranger of such uncommon appearance set all tongues wagging. All tongues wagging means people started talking about such a stranger in such winter. एंड दिस वाज एन अनयूजुअल इवेंट कि इस मौसम में भी कोई स्ट्रेंजर, और इस तरह का स्ट्रेंजर जिसने अपने चेहरे पे बैंडेज लपेटी हुई है, स्ट्रेंज लुक का जो स्ट्रेंजर है. सो पीपल स्टार्टेड टॉकिंग अबाउट हिम. मिसेस हॉल, the landlord's wife, made every effort to be friendly, but Griffin had no desire to talk and told her, "My reason for coming to Iping is a desire for solitude. I do not wish to be disturbed in my work. Besides, an accident has affected my face." He gave reason that I have used bandages because in some accident I have some marks, or I have some scar marks, or my face was infected. That's why I have used this bandage, and I don't want to be disturbed because I want solitude, means loneliness, for my experiments. Satisfied that her guest was an eccentric scientist, and in view of the fact that he had paid her in advance, Mrs. Hall was prepared to excuse his strange habits and irritable temper. But the stolen money did not last long, and presently Griffin had to admit that he had no more ready cash. He pretended, however, that he was expecting a check to arrive at any moment. Now, because he spent all the money which he theft from that store, now he didn't have money, and now he was pretending कि उसके उसको एक चेक मिलने वाला है, and he will pay. Shortly afterwards, a curious episode occurred. Very early in the morning, a clergyman means priest, चर्च का जो पादरी होता है, फादर होता है, and his wife were awakened by noises in the study. Creeping downstairs, they heard the chink of money being taken from the clergyman's desk. Now, in that village, near that inn, उस होटल के जहाँ पे वो रह रहा था, पास ही में एक clergyman रहता था. Now, the strange episode happened there, means early in the morning, means in night. The husband wife wake up. They saw someone or some noises in their study room, and when they went there, there was no one. Without making any noise and with a poker grasped firmly in his hand, the clergyman flung open the door, surrender. Then, to his amazement, he realized that the room appeared to be empty, and his wife looked under the desk and behind the curtains and even up the chimney. There was not a sign of anybody, yet the desk had been opened and the housekeeping money was missing. And when they reached into that room, there was no one, and money was quite missing. Means it was a strange theft. अजीब तरह की ये चोरी थी जहाँ पे चोर नजर नहीं आ रहा था लेकिन चोरी हो रही थी. Extraordinary affair, the clergyman kept saying for the rest of the day. But it was not the as extraordinary as the behavior of Mrs. Hall's furniture a little later that morning. और उधर वो चोरी हुई और इधर उस इन में मिसेस हॉल कि वहाँ पे भी कुछ स्ट्रेंज थिंग हुई. What was that? The landlord and his wife, means Mrs. and Mr. Hall, were up very early and were surprised to see the scientist's door wide open. Usually it was shut and locked, and he was furious if anyone entered his room. The opportunity seemed too good to be missed. They peeped round the door, saw nobody, and decided to investigate. The bedclothes were cold, showing that the scientist must have been up for some time. And stranger still, the clothes and bandages that he always wore were lying about the room. Now, there was in that hotel, the room was opened, quite open. Earlier, he was not at all allowing anyone to peep in or to come in his room, and if anyone does so he become furious, means the stranger Griffin become furious. But now at this time the door was quite wide open, so it was very strange thing for Mrs. and Mr. Hall. They decided to investigate. They entered into that room and they saw the bedclothes were completely closed, means cold, means there was no one who slept there. And the clothes, the bandages, the goggle and everything which that stranger Griffin used to wear, they were thrown in that room or scattered in that room. All of a sudden Mrs. Hall heard a sniff close to her ear. A moment later, the hat on the bedpost leapt up and dashed itself into her face. Then the bedroom chair became alive. Springing into the air, it charged straight at her, legs foremost. As she and her husband turned away in terror, the extraordinary chair pushed them both out of the room and then appeared to slam and lock the door after them. Now, the strange thing happened. Means the invisible man came there, and because he was invisible, so Mrs. and Mr. Hall could not see him, but he was present there. Now he wanted to show his presence. Means he wanted to take both Mr. and Mrs. Hall out of his room. So he threw the hat on the face of Mrs. Hall, and he used chair to make them out of the room. Mrs. Hall almost fell down the stairs in hysterics. Hysterics means pagalpan or confusion. She was convinced that the room was haunted by spirits and that the stranger had somehow caused these to enter into her furniture. Now she became mad. Means she started talking the mad things, and she was quite convinced that the stranger Griffin was responsible for all these things. My poor mother used to sit in chair, she moaned, to think it should rise up against me now. Means she says that this chair was used by my mother and now the chair is rebellious against me. Means that person hit me with the same chair. The feeling among the neighbors was the trouble was caused by witchcraft. Means लोग ये भी अंदाजा लगा रहे थे कि ये कोई जादू टोना हो सकता है. विचक्राफ्ट मीन्स जादू टोना या टोटका जिसे हम कहते हैं. But witchcraft or not, when news of the burglary at the clergyman's home became known, the strange scientist was strongly suspected of having had a hand in it. Suspicion grew even stronger when he suddenly produced some ready cash, though he had admitted not long before that he had no money. So now the entire suspicion, पूरा शक जो है उसी पे जाता था, because he was the strange person. Mm, in that room also he was not seen, and the room locked, and at the same time at the clergyman's house also the same thing happened, that no one was there and the burglary took place. That's why he was responsible for that, and suspicion grew. और शक और ज़्यादा कब हो गया, एक दिन पहले तक उसके पास पैसे नहीं थे देने के लिए कैश, and he made excuse of getting a check very soon, and immediately next day he had money to spend. That's why the suspicion grew. The village constable was secretly sent for means to call, बुलाना या बुलाया गया. Instead of waiting for constable, Mrs. Hall went to the scientist who had somehow mysteriously appeared from his empty bedroom. I want to know what you have been doing to my chair upstairs, she demanded, and I want to know how it is that you came out of an empty room and how you entered a locked room. So now she is completely confused. She wanted to know. She is very furious also, and she wanted to know that how you entered into that locked room, which has locked from inside. Then how did you enter? So she wanted to know. The scientist was always quick tempered, and he was very short tempered, quick tempered. Now he became furious. You don't understand who or what I am, he shouted. Very well, I'll show you. Now he became very furious, and he wanted to show them. Means he wanted to beat them or harm them. Suddenly he threw off bandages, whiskers, spectacles, and even nose. It took him only a minute to do this. He horrified means make them horrify, afraid. People in the bar found themselves staring at headless men. Now he became headless because he removed his head, nose, spectacles, bandages. So he become without head. Mr. Jeffers, the constable, means he reached there. He now arrived and was quite surprised to find that he had to arrest a man without a head. But Jeffers was not easily prevented from doing this his duty. If a magistrate's warrant ordered a person's arrest, then that person had to be arrested with or without his head. Means now he was completely ready to arrest a person, whether he had head or not. It doesn't matter. There followed a remarkable scene as The policeman tried to get hold of a man who was becoming more and more invisible because he was removing his clothes, so he was becoming more and more invisible. He threw off one garment after another. Finally, a shirt flew into the air, and the constable found himself struggling with someone he could not see at all. Some people tried to help him but found themselves hit by blows that seemed to come from nowhere. Now, people started struggling means with the constable. Mm, they were helping constable and trying to catch that invisible man, but that was invisible. How could they catch? So they were not at all able to catch that invisible person, and they were getting the blows. उनको चोट चोटें पड़ रही थी because that invisible man was beating them. Griffin was beating them. In the end, Jeffers was knocked unconscious and he made a last attempt to hold on to the unseen scientist. There were nervous, excited cries, hold him, but this was easier than done. Griffin had shaken himself free and no one knew where to lay hands on him. Now, Griffin became free. Jeffers the constable could not catch him. He tried a lot, but he couldn't catch him because that thief, the Griffin, the scientist, was quite invisible. That is all about the story written by H.G. Wells. Thank you so much.